even a question. It's just clearly the best in Point Break is Swayze. It's actually just Swayze's hair is the best thing in Point Break. It's Swayze's hair in Point Break is better than most movies that came out in the 1990s. It's like it is an all-time level mane of hair that is on the Rushmore of movie hair. Like if I was going to have movie hair of any character, it's probably Swayze in Point Break, but it actually might even be Swayze in Dirty Dancing second, which is crazy if you think about how iconic Swayze's hair. I mean, he has iconic hair in a way. Like Swayze, everything he touched turned to gold. It seemed. It's just a real shame we didn't get like a longer, more storied career out of that guy. It sucks that we only got a few years. But anyway,
we are live. Welcome to the Masters of Modern live at Gencon Online 2020 podcast. I am your host Alex Kessler here with my co-hosts Ben Bateman and Michael Grothy.
Hello.
We had the calendar screen on for a while to let people show up before we got started, and I needed a way to kind of transition from calendar. The thing I figured let Ben rant about Patrick Swayze. I do think it's funny that we open up with hair because I was joking with Michael while you were gone that like we kind of have a gradient of like very, very, very slicked back hair with Ben to the total chaos that's going on with my hair, with Michael in between. Just like everything from like a more of a what's the Bateman, the other Bateman, Patrick Bateman,
Jason Bateman,
Patrick
Bateman, from American Psycho.
Yeah, American Psycho hair.
Yeah, Patrick Bateman.
Yeah, all the way down. So welcome to the Masters of Modern podcast. We are a podcast for those joining that don't normally watch us that focuses on Magic the Gathering and kind of all of the things going on there, specifically through the lens of eternal formats like Modern, and hence the name. We, this weekend, are doing a bunch of content for a game that we kickstarted called Battle Bosses 2 years ago that is coming out this fall that we're really excited about. It involves these cool, almost action figure-like miniature sculpts and characters that you get inside with all these other kind of cards and upgrades, and then they battle each other. There's a bunch of different kind of game modes available that we'll be playing over the weekend, live streaming, both on the MMCast YouTube channel as well as my personal Twitch account, Kess Wiley. You may be listening to this right now on both of those places. It is available for pre-order, so if you want to try and check it out, you can go to kess.co/shop and pre-order Battle Bosses as we speak. And it'll come out.
Or if you want more information about Battle Bosses before you decide to pre-order, you can go to battlebosses.com. We'll also talk about it here, obviously, and throughout the weekend. And
Yep. So please like and subscribe. If you're watching live on YouTube right now, it's always important. Just hit that like button, hit the thumb up. It helps all the algorithms on the YouTube channel to do well, etc. But the other thing we're going to be talking about today is this is a weird show, right? Like Gencon's my favorite convention every year. And I'm doing it from home. And I was talking with my dad actually yesterday on kind of COVID's effect on our lives, and just like one of the probably my biggest negative is just like I was supposed to go to 7 Magic Fests this year. Like this was going to be the year I was going to go to Magic Fests. I had them all on my calendar. Not to mention Command Fests. There was going to be Gencon, Origins, Dice Tower, Essen,
maybe PAX Unplugged,
depending on how Origins went. Like we're all on the schedule of conventions that Kess was going to do. VidCon, we were going to do a big installation of hoops at VidCon for Kess. Not to mention like New York Toy Fair, Dallas Toy Fair, Atlanta Gift Show, Dis Toy in London. Like all of these things that normally are my life every year just didn't happen. I did New York Toy Fair, I did Magic Fest Reno, I did and some other toy fairs in January, and that
I will
was
say
it.
that like Magic Fest Reno being the last Magic Fest, the last Magic Fest
ever?
Until who knows, maybe ever. It was a good one.
Yes, that is true.
Very fun.
Thanks, really Olivia Guberthicks was able to get as many of content creators in the world all into one location at once. It's very interesting that the last two.
Yeah, it was really GP Olivia.
Right.
That was good. So.
Yeah, that plus then I did Command Fest, DC, and then that within 2 months of each other, or 3 months. Well, it feels like a month of each other, but that's because from January to February I basically didn't exist. as a human.
looking back at the end of February, it's so crazy to think how immediately different the world became in the matter of like a day. Because like Alex, you and I flew out to you guys went to Reno. I was in Atlanta for Schmodown the same weekend. We came back, and like 3 days later, you and I went and shot with the professor. We went and did a video with Tulare Community College in Portland. That was on like Saturday. The national emergency was the next Friday. I mean, we got back to LA, and within 6 days, we weren't like allowed on airplanes anymore.
So Alex
like,
Alex and I were back in Reno at the time.
Oh right,
Gamma.
we were Gamma that week.
At Gamma when things were starting to get really bad. Like everybody knew it was a thing going into Gamma, but it wasn't at the point where things were getting canceled or anything was closed. It was just kind of like, you know, stay 6 feet apart and use hand sanitizer, right? And then, like, as things are happening, we're like seeing on social media and the news that it's like, actually don't go anywhere. And we're like, well, what if we're already at a place?
I remember calling Alex
about going home. Like he was on the phone with his dad, like considering like, should I go home right now? I can't afford to get sick. Like,
yeah. Well, like Ben Michael and Sam and Max, who all kind of work on the Battle Bosses team and Kess, were already in Reno, and I was leaving a day afterwards. And like there are people like my dad and mom were like, no, you shouldn't fly. I'm like, I can't not go. I've sent people to the infection zone. I have to protect them.
Gamma is like a retailer facing show, so it would have been really nice to have Alex there to talk to like big distributors and stuff, because that's like, you know, Sam was relatively new to the company, and then Max and I are not salespeople, so we really needed like a salesperson who could talk to big accounts. Like I can talk to a mom and pop, no problem. I used to be one, but as far as distributors go, I feel like I'm not qualified for that.
Sam's actually in the chat on Twitch, and he brings up it's crazy to think back to Gamma and that it was like no one was wearing masks. It was a maskless show.
We didn't
know.
I mean, firstly, like it wasn't as widespread. I don't think there are any cases that are linked back to Gamma, because I think that Gamma would have said something to us. Like they would have sent out an email like, hey, just letting everybody know there have been a couple of cases from people who had been at the show, and that didn't happen. So I suspect that nobody at the show actually had it, because I do kind of trust Gamma to let us know if they did.
I emailed them like immediately afterwards being like, hey, it would be good if you let people know, like if you kept track. And then like literally the next day they sent out an email blast being like, hey, if anyone gets it, let us know. We just want to make sure we can track it from Gamma. And so the only way people had it there is if they didn't report it to Gamma, right? Like that they like were secretive.
But there
about
wasn't like a huge thing where like, you know, everybody knew that Gamma was a hotbed for whatever, because it like wasn't as widespread yet. But also, yeah, it's like we didn't know how dangerous it was. A lot of people didn't have it yet, and it was a very scary experience though, hearing about how like, oh, you know, people, because that was at the time we were learning a lot about the disease in the US at least, and it's like, oh, well, you know, people could have had it for 2 weeks and not show any symptoms. And so all these, like everybody who walks by the booth, it's like, hi.
Yeah. There was like no handshaking. I washed my hands so many times, and it was like literally I think by the end of the show I had like cracks in my skin, because like between the dry, cold winter air of Reno added to just like continuous hand washing, dries you out. There's no more oil on your hands.
We were there too.
Yeah.
Well, so we don't know how long it's going to be until we get to go back into those germ compromised situations. For now, we're all in our little respective corners, rooms, offices, what have you. But we still get to do fun events, because that's what all of the companies now are starting to work to make sure we can, which is obviously what Gencon is. And you know, Magic Fests have been happening, sort of, right? Like sort of a digital version of Magic Fests have been happening.
There's been Command Fest. I don't think they've been doing tournaments, right? Like they've
been doing Magic Fest online is a thing.
Okay, yeah.
And they're trying stuff out, I know. But this is going to be the world we're in for a minute. And I think there are some, as much as I miss being able to go to events, and I really do, and I know we'll be at a time again when we go back to them. That's going to happen, and I don't know how long it's going to be, but you know, it'll happen again. But in the meantime, you know, there are things that are happening as a result of it. I think Arena, which was already picking up a lot of steam, is picking up a crazy amount of steam now. I mean, all the three of us are all talking about Arena now. Often, we weren't doing that before. That's right. Well, I'm saying the three of us weren't talking about it all the time.
Sure.
I think that has more to do with it being on Max, Ben, than it no longer crashes your computer to try and like duct tape Arena onto it, so you're able to play it for the first time.
Yeah. Well, I could play it on my stupid little PC that I had, but anyway, the point being, there's a lot of momentum behind Arena, which is a lot of fun and is definitely a very cool experience for us to be in. So it kind of brings to mind the question of as we evolve and grow these online conventions and things and tournaments, what's that going to look like? I think that's an interesting question to ask, right? What's next?
One thing that I think is interesting across many things, not just Magic and gaming, is that because all these measures are being put in place to figure out how to do stuff digitally, and like in the Magic space, that's more people picking up Arena, more people picking up Magic Online and Spell Table in particular, and like a lot of these like online focused tournament organization systems. Wizards has one out now called Event Link, that is replacing the Wizards Event Reporter, and you can do on your phone. So kind of like how you can check your pairings on your phone at a Channel Fireball by going to a website. Instead, when you enter an event at a local game store now, they'll have a code for you, and there might even be a QR code you can scan. I don't know if they have that functionality, but there's a code. You put the code into your phone, and now you're entered in their system. And pairings, you get like a notification when pairings are up. You report on the app, and then when everybody's reported, it just sends out pairings again. And so that's really cool. But like my local game store, Heidi Ho Comics, we talk about on the podcast sometimes, they are doing digital events on Spell Table, where they use this pairings, because you don't have to be in the store. They just DM everybody who signs up and pays the event code, and then everybody puts it in their phone, and the phone uses the internet to do all the reporting. And so because all this technology is coming out that like kind of makes do without, I wonder like how much this stuff is going to be continuing even when paper events are going to happen. And some people are just going to decide like it's cheaper and more convenient for me to just stay home and play in a Spell Table event than it would be for me to go to a local game store because I live far away, or because I don't like to go outside, or I have to get off work and rush through rush hour traffic to get to a game store or whatever. And I think that's happening in other globally, is as companies and individuals figure out like solutions for how to do things remotely, how much of that is just going to continue happening remotely because people are like, actually this is really convenient and I wish this technology existed before.
I think the answer to the question is that there will be a certain level of like you mentioned, convenience is going to be key, right? If it's something that you kind of were, it's something that you were like, yeah, I could go either way, but the way we've always done it is this way, I think it's one thing. But I think that there are aspects to, like, for instance, the gathering part of Magic, which is like what has kept it around for such a long time and really made it popular for such a long time, that does make me feel like there's no amount of online or digital, even like Zoom, whatever, that can replace like that feeling of walking into one of those big halls and there being like just the physical cards everywhere, everything's the foils, and it's shiny, and there's cosplayers and there's artists, and that. And then if you compare it to like the other things, like I don't care how excited you get about a movie streaming and being available for maybe even less money on my television, I want to watch it on a big screen. I'll clawed kick,
So don't get me wrong. I don't think that like Magic Fests are dead, right? Like even if COVID continues for a while and there's no vaccine, and it's conventions just don't continue throughout 2021 or something, I think that there will be paper Magic, both on the Magic Fest scale and on the local game store scale for sure eventually. And there will be Gen Cons and there will be everything else. And I think that some of the tournament organizers and event organizers might end up going out of business, but there will be people to fill the void when it comes back in, right? Like if there's no Gen Con for 2 years, can the Gen Con Corporation survive that? Maybe not. But I think that like conventions are not dead, Magic Fests are not dead, and FNM isn't dead. But what I do think is that like maybe some of it has to get scaled back because of these competing events.
Yeah, I think there's a restructuring on how Magic Fests are done, right? And GPs are done. And is there an opportunity? Because I don't know if I can think of anything other than Magic that has the size of convention on a weekend to weekend basis all year round, right? Like all over the world. What?
Continue.
Yeah, all over the world, there's basically a convention for Magic in a place every weekend, and that kind of doesn't exist for any other property. Now, part of that is because there's a tournament around it, right, and that's what's funding it, and in some places that's all it is, right? There's a tournament, and there's people that sell cards at those tournaments, and then maybe the local area was able to get like a few different people to have booths, but there's nothing insane. And then that on the opposite side of that spectrum is Magic Fest Vegas, right, where it's like multi-day, 3 different events are happening, panels and convention, and kind of a lot more convention-esque trappings around that event. And Wizards was already leaning towards trying to make each Magic Fest more of a Magic Fest, right? Like that's why they changed the name. It used to be Grand Prix, and then they changed it to Magic Fest to kind of brand it around more of the convention atmosphere. They added the command zone to every single one. They added all these different features, and so it's going to be interesting to see how like the momentum of GPs is gone, right? Like regardless of even if they want to bring them back, the momentum is gone. So you now open up into 2021, or really 2022 is probably the first time that like this is going to be normal again, or get close to some amount of normalcy. And if I'm Wizards, do I, move more of my weekend-based tournament play to online while I have local, like go back to the old system where GPs were ran by 6 different TOs that just were able to run GPs at them versus Channel Fireball having kind of the exclusive Grand Prix running kind of title. Do I then do like 5 Magic or like a quarterly Magic Fest Vegases, right? We like pick what our big Magic Fests are going to be and then like lean into those and do like maybe kind of the way PAX does it, right? PAX has Magic Fest Unplugged, or has PAX Unplugged, PAX East, PAX West, PAX Australia, and I think 2 other ones. And so like that's like 6 conventions a year that are much bigger events. And does Magic lean into that, or do they start
or like DreamHack is like a good comparison as well. I mean, they do different games, but they do like big events with a big tournament, and they don't do them every single weekend.
Right.
And already they kind of like depowered Magic Fests for competitive play, because I think, like you said, that was a lot of what was subsidizing them being every single weekend. Like a convention every single weekend doesn't make sense. A tournament every single weekend does make sense, because that keeps the OP gears grinding. But already, like with getting rid of pro points and kind of like taking a lot of the prize out of not making top 8 at a Grand Prix, it meant that like competitive players were not necessarily going to a GP to compete. They're not like flying across the country to go to a GP. It's more like a local convention. And I think, with all organized play moving to digital, how much of it is going to move back to GPs, right? And how much are GPs just going to become convention?
Well,
right?
and it's interesting because like the Command Fest is the opposite side of that experiment, right? They experimented with 3. This is a commander-focused event, which is basically what a Grand Prix is if you take the GP out, or basically what a Magic Fest is if you take the GP out. Now there's a bunch of stuff that was missing, like they didn't have a limited focus. There wasn't kind of ways to play that weren't commander at these events, and I think that was the flaw of the events, right? Like I do know that the retailers that go to Magic Fests normally complained about Command Fest specifically because commander players don't buy cards. They don't sell cards, right? They're like the worst customer for a tournament grinding focused store, that they needed to figure out a new way to kind of make money off of those events to make it worth it. And I think that there's a hybrid of a Command Fest and a Magic Fest that could be the future, that becomes much more limited. Like, we have Magic Fest Vegas has panels, Magic Fest Seattle had panels, and that adds a lot to these things, but takes a lot more effort from organizers to do, and maybe that becomes more of a limited run situation.
Well, I think the other thing that we can expect is that, I remember like last year probably there was like Arena computers set up, like here's your code, you can get on Arena, and there was like a little corner. I think you got to figure that like going forward, these conventions and these tournament weekends will have a lot more of that, right? There will just be like a lot more people where they're like, show up, you can still be here and be a part of this, but also you can play Arena because that's what you know how to do, because that's what our promotion and money is behind, is growing this. So like, which is right. So like because like if you go to like a big esports tournament, like right, everybody's just like sitting in front of a computer, like at these little kiosks and booths across from each other playing, right? That's like what you do. I mean, they obviously have done it on the Magic Online Championship Series. And so I think that's interesting because that's so much less of a social experience. So you'd be bringing people somewhere to be less social, but you would have to, I feel like when these open back up, you would have to accommodate that want, because if you didn't, you're not, right? It doesn't match up with all of the momentum that I feel like has been built, all the goodwill that has been built by Wizards. So let me ask you guys, just as obviously like, Magic fans and longtime convention goers, when you look at a game like Battle Bosses that you guys have now spent a lot of time working on the last couple of years, how do you think that fits into this sort of the future of conventions, where people are going to have to be a little bit more socially distanced? I think even after a vaccine, people will just generally, people won't want to crowd into little tight spaces as often. I mean, do you think that like a game like, or go ahead, yeah?
Yeah, so I don't know if that's true. I think the moment people can go back to conventions, I think there's some things that'll change. I think like companies are going to look at how they have people in an office totally differently and work differently, right?
Yeah.
Like if you don't need to pay giant like AT&T or like a Warner Brothers or these big studios. Like if I don't need 30 people in a small office space on a floor because half of them can work from home, now I don't have to pay rent on these giant office buildings and my overhead's down. And not to mention, people can work from anywhere in the country, so then I don't have to pay, someone the much larger salary needed to be a person that lives in Los Angeles versus someone that lives in Indianapolis, right? Like that part of just the cost of living in Los Angeles is so much higher that you need to pay people more here. So I think that changes. But like when it comes to like activities that people like doing, Florida couldn't handle it, right? like if you look at videos of Florida and beaches, there's like, or like that Michigan Lake video where just like in the middle of quarantine, people were shoulder to shoulder in the water, drinking, partying, and like hanging out with each other. If you look at
Disney World is open, Universal Studios Orlando is open.
Right, like so I don't know, and the people that are working those things are instilling social distancing stuff to protect them, but like all reports are saying that people within the park are like unable to handle being socially distanced from each other. Like you can't even, like the funniest picture I've seen so far, was like at a restaurant that had like on the floor those like stickers that are like, this is where you need to stand to stay socially distanced, this is 6 feet apart, and there was like someone wearing a vest that on the back said, it was like one of those yellow construction worker vests, but on the back said social distance corona compliance manager, and he was like 2 feet behind the person in front of him in line, and you could see like the distance between the pods. So it's like, I don't know. From my thoughts, like, yes, there's a digital focus, but I think a very important part of Magic is the gathering half. I don't think this game is competitive in ways with other things without that aspect. And I do know like Arena is making them a lot of money, and there's a lot of money to be made on digital components. But like, there's a reason that the Pokemon franchise, the largest money making for them is cards, is the physical good that they sell to people, more than anything else. Almost everything else is an advertisement for those cards. And
for the cards,
and that's like because it's a physical good, because you're selling it, because it's going to retails, because there's flow to that, versus digital, which does have a lot of money behind it, and you can make a lot of money there, but it's a weirder component. And even like you can kind of see it with the themes of the Magic community, right? People are very unhappy when like the only way they can interact is the kind of the soullessness that is Arena with Magic, right? They want to be able to be around people and empathize with people and hang out with people shoulder to shoulder. And I think as soon as that's available, that will come back. I just don't know if it'll be in a Grand Prix format.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely looking forward to it, as we mentioned earlier. But I want to ask you guys, because obviously, as you mentioned, there's a lot of money to be made. And so if you're starting from scratch and you're going to make a game, and obviously the three of us, our background is Magic, like at our core. That's like where we all come from. We love it with all our hearts. So when you guys were thinking about making a game, like how do you approach that, knowing that so much of what's going on now is digital? That's so much of the way of the future. Like TCGs are like made now to be digital games. They're almost not really made as physical games anymore. So what do you do when you want to come up with a physical game like Battle Bosses? Obviously, because you have the background in physical.
One thing I hear about from like other board game circles, I guess, more than like specifically board gamers, but in board game circles, I've heard a lot of people like asking for recommendations for 2-player games or picking up more 2-player games. And one thing that's great about Battle Boss is we did design it to be a 2-player game, which means that if you are quarantining with your spouse, girlfriend, roommate, sibling, parent, whoever, right? Like if you're quarantined with one person or one person who'd be willing to play games with you, and then the rest of your family who doesn't care or whatever, you can play battle bosses with just one person. And you know, when things are opened back up, you can play battle bosses with 4 to 6 or 3 or 5 or whatever you want to do, right? I mean, I think that yes, we don't have battle bosses digital or anything because making a board game was like already kind of out of our comfort zone as a company, and I'm glad that we did it, and I think that we made a great game. I think digital is like so much more complication heaped on top of that in an area that is not any of our expertise, but I think being a 2-player game in this time is important, and you know, like it's good to have something to do physically, like interacting with physical goods, interacting with a person across the table from you, not looking at a screen. And like jigsaw puzzles are sold out everywhere. There's a lot of like, you know, a lot of 2-player games are selling really well, like I said, and battle bosses is that. So I think we got lucky in some ways that like we were designing a board game in a time where like people are not allowed to interact face to face. But I think being 2 players is key there, and in 3 or 4 as well. If you know, if you do have a family and you want to play with the whole family, you can play with the whole family, or you can play 1 versus 1 or whatever.
Talk to me a little bit about the
Like, sorry, I can also say that, like, you know, in our conversation with retailers as a toy company, I like games, toys, puzzles, video games are like the things that are up farther than anything else, and toilet paper, right? Like essential goods were the things that like spiked during this moment because people are stuck at home, and board games are one of the things you can do at home, right? You can't go to a bar, you can't go see a movie in a movie theater, but you can play video games, you can play a board game. And like digital versus paper, I think not everyone wants to play a video game, right? And not everyone wants to.
And if you do want to play a video game, a lot of people just want to play a video game. Not everybody is looking for a digital version of a board game. If they're going to be home playing a video game, they would rather play Counter-Strike than like, you know, digital Settlers of Catan or something.
And in a moment where like social interaction is the one thing no one has, right? And if you can do something, video games like have had a pretty distinct like leaning towards making it, because online play exists, that like most games don't have split screen multiplayer, right? Like the days of Halo where 5 people would play on the same TV have gone away. And like, you know, Mario Kart, all of that stuff has much lessened. And there are some games out there, Mario Kart being one of them, but like for the most part, games no longer about split screen, they're about online play, which means that if you want to play with other people in your house, you have to either have like 3 PS4s, 1 per person, or, you know, there has to be cross-platform. You have to have multiple systems, or, you know, whatever. And so, like, I think, like, to be able to play with the people,
Nintendo Switch, because Nintendo is carrying the torch on local multiplayer.
But even that, like, the most popular Nintendo game from this period has been Animal Crossing, which you can't play with 2. Like, you barely can play with 2 people on one screen.
It has local multiplayer.
It does.
I mean,
it does. You're right. So
not like this is Call of Duty, you know, Warzone or whatever, where it literally does not have it. Like, it does have it. It's not as optimized as a single player, but, you know, when is it ever?
Right. Now, yeah, and Ben, you had a question.
Yeah, my next question I wanted to ask you was just like, again, I was drawn into Magic by the art. That's what got me into Magic when I was a little kid. The images and the art, and I think it gets a lot of people into Magic. I think it's like one of the big draws is how cool it looks. So when you guys were designing battle bosses, like, where did you go for the artistic inspiration, for the, you know, like what was where did it all come from? I mean, you have so many images to draw from.
Tropes. It definitely, like, when we were making characters, because the idea was just like anything can fight here. What is something that's the main requirement had to be something that was big and that had minions that proportionally were small in comparison.
Because we wanted it to be like kaiju battles, kind of.
And that's where we started. Yeah, and then like,
that wasn't exactly where we started.
Yes, that's true.
Right.
We started on. There's a game
started
called
on
an RTS.
You could go, Alex. You designed this game. I wasn't even involved in the design of this game.
Well, that is absolutely not true.
Much less.
This game you mean Terra? Yeah.
Terra, I was not very
not battle
involved
bosses.
in Terra.
I was like, you like were a co-designer of battle bosses, but
You
Terra.
brought Terra to Heidi Ho a few times, and I like gave you my opinion on it, but I didn't like sit down and be like, I'm gonna design for Terra.
So the idea of battle bosses, which originally was just literally boxes you buy with a game and a class in that box, and then that matches up with the different box that they have their class in, and then they fight each other, right? Like in battle bosses, basically there's the samurai box versus the horror shadow horror box versus the fairy box, and the bosses are just the main character you're playing with out of that box. And the original one was more RTS focused. It was based on like games like Red Alert or World of Warcraft, or not World of Warcraft, regular Warcraft or StarCraft, where you would build bases. And then those bases would eventually upgrade to more bases, and it was actually based on the Planeswalker mechanic. So it was basically...
It was like a tech tree, right? So you would start out with your quote-unquote command center. We'll just use Terran StarCraft, right?
Sure.
And once you have a command center, now you can build a barracks. And once you have a barracks, now you can build an engineering bay. And now that you have an engineering bay, you can build a... I haven't played StarCraft in too long. You can build a science facility or something, right?
Right.
And each of these upgrades is building on each other, but in addition, each of those buildings can do its own thing, right? So each of the buildings had like planeswalker abilities.
Yeah, like a planeswalker, right? They had like 2 moves. They had like 3 moves, right? They had like a plus and a minus that let them go back and forth and like doing the thing that they want to do normally in the game, and then they'd have like an ultimate, and that ultimate was most often build the next building in the tree. So you would like build a barracks, it would then like plus up twice, making like 2 minions that would then go fight for you, and then minus to build the science center, and then...
Yeah, and like a standard one would be like, you know, to use a planeswalker, it would be like +1 make a light unit, -2 make a heavy unit, and then -6 or whatever make build the next building or whatever.
And so
it wouldn't go away if you minus down to 0. You could keep plussing back up.
Correct. You just wouldn't be able to use another minus move if you went to 0.
That was the one difference with planeswalkers, is like they couldn't be destroyed because you are trying to build up like an RTS base.
And then literally they would fight down 1 lane, which I think was maybe the biggest flaw. Me and Michael have thought of like maybe re-looking at this game because there's something cool about this part of it. And the games that had been played, I think I eventually played with my younger brother in testing a 6-hour game of this game that never ended.
Because 1 lane meant that your minions were just like crashing against each other. And it would be like you'd push it this way, and they would like get a big tech upgrade and push you back, and then you would push them back, and then they would push you back, and there was no tactics to it.
Right, like
anybody who's watching and wondering like your inspirations, guys, like because obviously Magic is a big part of it, but like what games do you love to play that like inspired you to make this? I mean, board games, like what are the ones that people could compare it to, the play experience?
Battle bosses or Terra?
Battle bosses, because obviously Terra is the original.
Before we get to that question, I wanted Terra was broken, but one thing that was cool about Terra was that 2 of the different factions we created summoned super minions that were these like, one of them like literally the building came to life and you moved the building down the map and it just destroyed things as it went, and then another one created a super minion. And that's when we realized that was the cool thing. And so then we kind of refocused the whole game. At the time, I was also playing a game called Star Wars Destiny, which was like
I think originally we like the super minion is the coolest part. Let's make sure that every faction gets a super minion. So we made a couple of new factions. I guess I did work on Terra a little bit, but Alex had done like 90% of it, and then I did 10%, and then we changed it to battle bosses. And in that 10%, I like designed a new faction, and we had to make sure it had a super minion because that's the best part of the game. And then at a certain point, like playtesting this game, we were like, what if it was just a game about the super minion, and everything else was like your super minion's ability?
Right, and then that made it into a map, and that started as a diamond, and that then eventually became the donut because we realized we wanted a way to have something in the middle, and that evolved into like upgrading your, instead of buildings, upgrades would just upgrade your boss, and then he would summon the minions, which were always a part of it, and then those minions originally
because the upgrades are now things that are like you're drawing a hand of cards and playing cards from hand, they ended up sharing a resource pool rather than like entering with loyalty or whatever.
Right, and then
it didn't make as much sense for like a boss gets, plays his machete, and his machete has energy counters on it that you can removed to do stuff. Like that didn't make as much sense anymore now that it wasn't a building that's like using resources.
And then that evolved into, okay, what are bosses, right? And then so the first four were Grakthar, Cthulhu, um, uh, Mechabot, and Ryu. So kind of the idea was like we wanted to do Samurai with Dragon. We wanted to do
Originally, I believe there was a samurai faction in Terra that summoned a dragon. So
Yeah.
I think that's where Ryu came from. And there were goblins who didn't summon anything originally. I think eventually we made them summon a big
Sure.
ogre, a giant
Yeah,
goblin or something. And then there were robots. There was like a robotic faction like the Protoss or whatever.
The four original factions for Terra were like three that ended up being battle bosses, and then the fourth one was Super Party Battle. Was like the college campus from our game Super Party Battle.
There was like space monks as well.
Yes, because
they were one of the super minions. They would summon like their deity or whatever.
Right, because it was based on StarCraft, right? So we like had the StarCraft factions, and then we're like, oh, but the kind of idea behind this is we could like license it, so there'll be like a Terminator faction, and then we'll like even license one of our own other properties that we're coming out with, Super Party Battle, and so then eventually this all became the individual bosses. And then as we were playing, like that's why the first four are like very, very specifically tuned in an interesting way against each other as kind of like the base level, and a lot of them don't have like the extra tokens, right? Ryu was the first one to use specialty tokens, and so then that expanded into more and more, and different people designed different ones, and so then we started adding a bunch of different bosses, and just Captain Boat and Doc Explosion were the two that kind of got the farthest along the line on development. They were the closest to being like, oh, these are done. There's no problems with these. These work totally fine within the rule. They're not too powerful.
I think more importantly, they were the most fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like if we decided that some of the other bosses, which we did preview, so I can talk about them a little bit now, but like if we had decided that Slime, for example, was more fun than Captain Boat, I think we could have worked hard on Slime and made it into a thing.
Right.
But we decided that Captain Boat and Doc Explosion were the two kind of like farthest along, most fun, and so they came first, and the next up were like Nightmare. At the time of the Kickstarter, Nightmare and Alana we had done a bunch of work on because we thought they were fun, and they kind of like were not ready at the time of Kickstarter, but they were stretch goals, right? And then we unlocked them, and so we finished them up shortly after the Kickstarter.
Right. Nightmare's original problem was it was just wonky. Specifically, like, one of the mechanics in Nightmare is the possession mechanic, and originally there was just a lot of more ways to possess things, which just made it so your opponent would never make minions, right? It would kind of lock them out of doing anything, which we like were worried about, and so then we kind of revisited it. The other one was it just took a lot more work that once it was unlocked we were able to do, but before that happened we didn't want to put the resources on it to like figure out how discard works as a cost, how to cost discard in battle bosses, because at the end of every turn in the game, you draw up to 5 cards. And so in the game, discard is worse. It's not good. It's almost a benefit. Like it's me giving you a draw. It's like target player discards a card, draws a card, right? Like that's all it ends up being.
So there was a weird tension though, because you're playing with like a pretty small deck, and every character has signature cards. So like discard is bad because if you make your opponent discard, they get to draw. So if they choose the card they discard, they're going to discard something that they don't need right now, and they're going to draw something else. The thing is that there's not a lot of recursion in the game, and you have a pretty small deck compared to Magic. And so if you are like constantly discarding cards and drawing new cards, the cards you're discarding, you're just never going to see them again, right? Like if you discard some big expensive 5-drop because I made you discard on turn 2, and you're like, well, I just don't have the money for this. Later, you might want that 5-drop, and it's the only one in your deck, and you discarded it. So we didn't want like discard to be too strong, because if I'm like making you discard 3 cards every turn or whatever, you're going to churn through your whole deck, and you're going to have nothing to do because your deck is dead. And we can like make you reshuffle. There were a bunch of discussions about what happens when you deck.
Which is what we ended up, right?
Just made it so you will almost never deck, but so that we don't have to worry about it as much as possible. But yeah, so the discard was challenging, and then Nightmare was one of a few experiments that we did. There's other bosses down the line that also experimented with this. And some of them might actually pull it off, but we've experimented a few times with like minions that are different. And both Alana and Nightmare were like our first attempts at this. All the minions in the game function the same unless you play promotions. They all cost 2 energy. they move one space and they effectively have 1 health. But we experimented with like minions with multiple health, or minions with, if they are attacked, they die, but if they attack, then they act like a normal minion. So they're like weaker than normal, but maybe they're cheaper. Or like cards make them for less resources or whatever. Like it's easier to get them somehow.
Because like the Fae warriors originally, like fairies are smaller, right? Something that's like interesting about Fae Empress is of the bosses, and we've now like kind of swore this way that like what she's fighting with is her like avatar, right? When she's actually like fighting bosses, like a magical forest avatar, but originally it was like she was just regular sized. She was human sized, and then all of her Fae warriors were like actually the size that people normally imagine fairies to be, and so she had smaller health. Her Fae warriors were easier to kill, but they were much more aggressive, and they
right, because they're relying on like the element of surprise. Like if you catch a fairy and get them, then you're just gonna squish them because they're tiny. But if they like rush up on you, then they can like actually take you out.
And just every time
do you guys design and like write the stories behind these characters? Like do you like sort of have an understanding of like this is what Alana's story is and this is what she's battling with, and like is that something you guys, the background you do?
There's storylines for each of the characters kind of built around. There's nothing formalized. We're not writers, so I don't
think the reason that the bosses are the way that they are is in games, there's a lot to learn when you're playing a new game. For the most part, unless it's something abstract, like an abstract Euro game, like kind of pick up on concepts or whatever. But I think a lot of games like kind of rely on scaffolding from other games that people have played or like pop culture that people have absorbed. And so when you see Nightmare and you pick up Nightmare, and maybe you need to read the blurb to kind of get what we were going for, but you know what you're trying to do. You know what the goals of your boss are. And the reason is because like we kind of made sure that Nightmare's mechanics match up with what you would expect a character like that to do based on all the media you've ever seen in your life. And same with Cthulhu and Samurai and Ryu being a dragon. She doesn't act like a Western dragon or whatever, but when you see the Samurai, you kind of have an idea of like what samurai do in the real world, and that does translate to your gameplay, right? You're like kind of like a martial tactical faction where you're kind of trying to maneuver the battlefield, and we made sure that like the themes of our bosses line up with the way that they play to make the game easier to learn, like subtly easier to learn, right? Because if you are playing Mechabot, you kind of have ideas about robots in your head, and if we can make the gameplay kind of mesh with that, it makes it easier to get what's going on.
And some bosses, as far as story goes, have more story development than others. For instance, like Ryu doesn't have a ton of story behind her that we probably really developed, versus like Mechabot and Doxplosion, where Mechabot originally didn't have much story, but then by the adding Doxplosion and kind of coming up with this villain character for Mechabot to kind of battle against, we now kind of were able to build off of both of their storylines to figure out what that kind of looked like. And if you see if you look at the rulebook, there is the preview of the new bosses. Slime also comes from Futropolis and is also kind of part of this tug of war between 3 different factions within that world. And Cthulhu. And we kind of leaned on both Cthulhu and Nightmare when we were kind of figuring out, okay, why is the future fighting fantasy world, fighting like real world pirate land, like there's different kind of spectrums on this, and how did these all interact? And we were like, okay, but maybe there's a space in between that's being torn apart, and maybe the reason that happened is Doxplosion did some grand experiment that like ripped that apart there, and then that allowed Cthulhu to finally escape, and Nightmare has been on the edge of this, kind of weakening this over time. And so there's definitely just like the mechanics of the game have dictated the story more than anything. And then we've had, when we were doing the Kickstarter, we had a few different, there's like some short stories out. There's Cthulhu and Captain Boat, the origin of Captain Boat.
You can find them on battlebosses.com. There is a link on there that says check out the Battle Bosses blog or something like that. And these stories are on the Battle Bosses blog.
Yeah. So like Kevin Herman wrote a few, like the origins of Captain Boat, which is out there. And yeah, like sometimes like, and it's all like there was no direction, I guess, when it came to characters and story. It was much more by feel. I think I would say like the 2 biggest influences on this game to me were League of Legends and Magic. Magic and a lot of the, like, we're Magic players. I don't think there's a thing that I could do that isn't influenced by Magic in some way. But the way cards work, the way decks work, the way kind of combat and flow works, the way mechanics were referred to. We had to do a lot of work to make it so that we didn't have cards that said use magic terms, right? And like even when we did the live stream yesterday, we were like Sam, who was doing kind of commentary on me and Whitney playing, was like referring to stuff as the graveyard and the battlefield and like.
I mean, some of it is scaffolding, right? Like there are words that you want, that you can and might want to keep because it makes it easier for people who have played Magic to learn your game. But there's also things that don't make sense. Like the graveyard doesn't make sense. There's nothing dying and going to your discard pile in this game.
It's all upgrades and
right.
And
I play an effect and it goes to the graveyard for some reason. But like we colloquially, when we're playtesting, we'll often refer to things as our library or our graveyard. But it's not a stack of books or spells, and it's not a place where things go when they die, right? So so we had to like undo some of the Magic lingo in places that made sense. But then in other places, you have to think like, is the way that Magic says this actually just a good way to say it? And it kind of like onboards players because when they see this phrase of enters the battlefield or whatever, they get what it means, right?
And then with League of Legends, League of Legends is a game that is also based around tropes fighting each other, right? Like every character in the game is an insular character, and then as time has gone on, like characters will have relationships to each other, right? There is a world that they build that different factions are from, and there are multiple characters from the same place, or there's brothers and sisters or husbands and wives that are both characters. But ostensibly, the idea is you have one character, they have their moveset, and they have the story behind them, but that's it. And that's kind of how a lot of the bosses were originally built, which is why when we got to the point where we felt pretty developed and we had enough characters, we started looking at other game modes, and arena mode came out, right? We're like, okay, well, in many ways, these characters feel like League of Legends characters. They are singular tropes. They have all these moves. They're summoning creep even, and in some way is a tower defense game. And so then we looked at building kind of what happens if we build a map and try playing League of Legends with them. And it ended up being the most fun we had, especially as a lot of commander players, right? We like multiplayer formats more even than 1v1 formats. The group we played with like really had a good time. And so then we started developing those characters. We added, one of the reasons I think Fae Empress did cross the finish line is we realized like, okay, we want something that's a little bit more supporty and a little bit more, can do more like crowd control, like CC on minions on the map. And so she was kind of developed a little bit with that in mind. And so there's just different development in that space that kind of lended into that MOBA mode that we think kind of was really successful.
And I think the fun of writing stories for a property like this that has like a bunch of different random stuff that we smash together is like making the connections between characters, right? So like, oh, well, Mechabot and Doxplosion are both future-y. Like, how can we connect them? Oh, well, maybe Mechabot is like a superhero, kind of like a hero mech or whatever that you might see in like an anime or something. And Doxplosion is like his Mechabot's nemesis or whatever, who's like always trying to steal something or destroy the city or mind control the populace or whatever, right? And Mechabot is thwarting her at every turn. And then some of the connections are like, well, how are we supposed to connect this ogre to that? Or how are we supposed to connect this ogre to like, this nightmare monster or this pirate or this samurai, and so that's kind of the fun of like writing the stories of it. And that's kind of why we felt like we needed to write some stories and kind of figure out what the connections between the characters were, because it was fun.
Yep. And like when we were coming up with story beats, when we did the whole thing, like we were like, okay, what are the most interesting combos? Why, like, how would Ryu react to Grakthar pillaging her countryside? Like, she has all of her samurai villages all ready, their kingdom's doing great, and then like for some reason this fantasy ogre is like showed up and their goblins are stealing, pillaging and raiding. How does she react? And then I think Cthulhu and Captain Boat ended up fighting each other in story mode, partially just because they're both in water. Right. And so like in the artwork, it like kind of fit that's like the moment that made sense. Cthulhu in his splash art is standing in waves, and Captain Boat lives he's a boat. He lives in water.
Well, also Cthulhu, the Cthulhu mythos is that he like slumbers under the sea or whatever.
Yeah. He's a big.
The sculpts are awesome. Specifically the Captain Boat sculpt is one of my favorites. I think the boat looks at that as cool as I've seen. So I guess the last question, because we're wrapping up here in a second, but the last question I want to ask is, where can people get this? Exactly. The sculpts turned out really, really well. They like and it's cool to see them through the process. When we had like the non-color ones, and we like Gen Con last year, and yeah, the product turned out really well. It looks beautiful. So where can people get it? What's the process for people getting this?
Right now, it's available for so basically we launched the Kickstarter in 2018, end of the year, and through trials and tribulations, there's a video on our YouTube channel. You can kind of see the whole development process of how it's been going, and you can see all the pieces and stuff right now. But the Kickstarter is being delivered in October, November, so this fall, and then you can pre-order it now. On kess.co/shop and see all the information. There's a rule book and all these cool videos and pictures of gameplay on the Kess website or battlebosses.com. And then you can pre-order it, and then we'll send it to you before Christmas. So it'll be November is when pre-orders will also get sent out as kind of part of the delivery of the Kickstarter backers.
Amazing. Well, we have a congratulations from Jeff Roberts here in the chat. Thanks, Jeff. We appreciate it. He's stuck with us from the beginning. He's excited to see Battle Bosses launching. So
us too.
Thanks. We're really excited. I mean, we're like doing a whole celebratory weekend on Gen Con from home just because we're like so hyped that this is finally coming out. And like,
right. We looked at the exhibit hall and we were like, I don't know how anybody's gonna find our booth in this big mess of logos here. But you know, it's like a great excuse to kind of like get hyped about Battle Bosses, right? Yeah. Since it's finally coming out pretty soon, and we're like confident enough to create all this content around it.
And hopefully, again, please check it out and pre-order it. You can buy just 2 bosses. You don't have to buy the big all-in arena mode, and that's, you know, that way it kind of is just like an easy first step. And we're really hyped. We think it's going to be, people are really going to like it, and hopefully it goes well.
Amazing.
Yep. Cool.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching this Gen Con stream on Battle Bosses and the future of conventions and tournaments and all that. And we will be back all throughout the weekend with more content here for Gen Con, and we'll be obviously on this channel back with Magic content next week for the podcast.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you guys. We'll have on Monday 8:30 p.m. Our normal Commander live stream, and then we should have an episode like our regular episode coming out. Literally any second now. It's Friday, so.
and our producer and I talked about the Blue Black Rogues list a bunch that I've been playing on Historic, and during this, our producer texted us and was like, "The Blue Black Rogue list is sweet. I've been playing it. It's great. It's really good. I almost made Diamond. I got to Platinum Tier 1. I don't think I'll make Diamond this season, but
well, you have
close.
Like 12 hours, right, to get there.
I know. I'm gonna be in an RV with Wi-Fi on the way to a camping trip. So maybe I'll just hole up in the back of the RV and see if I can get to Diamond.
Just yeah, play some rocky motivational music and do your best here.
The arena grinding to diamond montage.
Yeah. We need like you just doing push-ups, like hydrating, typing on a computer, just like
using
clicking.
One of those like hand strengtheners for maximum click.
Oh yeah. I just started playing. I started playing 2 Mystical Disputes in the main, and the deck just got better, which is funny because that card's totally main deckable. It's really good.
Yeah. So beyond that, make sure to follow everyone. We're at the MMCast. I'm at Kess Wiley.
You guys can find me at Ben Bateman Media.
I'm at Dudard, Dudardd.
And make sure to follow Battle Bosses at Battle Bosses. And obviously, please check it out. We'd love if you can buy a copy of it and try it out. We're really excited by it. And the more we get this weekend, one of the other reasons to push this weekend is we are able to add orders to our initial order that we are buying from the factory. So that helps us also bring in more copies. So thank you so much for everyone for watching and participating. And hopefully you guys had a good time. And this excites you about the game we all made. And we'll talk to you guys next week.